Hi everybody, and welcome to the channel. My name is James Mann, and I'm a forager and a naturalist and a chef. And today it is early spring here in beautiful southern Ohio, and today we're going to be talking about ramps. I want to teach you how to find them, how to harvest them sustainably and ethically, and then we're going to jump in the kitchen and we're going to talk about how to cook them and preserve them to use all year long. The first lesson to find any wild food is not to look for that food itself. When I'm looking for mushrooms, I'm not looking for mushrooms. When I'm looking for ramps, I'm not really looking for ramps. I'm looking for the environments in which they grow. And as you can see, this area is full and abundant. This is a great place to look for ramps because all of the signs are here. We're in a bottomland, and as you can see behind me, there's a huge limestone cliff up, and this is what's known as a riparian buffer. So what this does is basically it's a giant filter that filters all the groundwater through these roots and into the creek right behind me. And these riparian areas are so important in some of my favorite ecosystems because these are really the lifeblood of the forest, and without these, the water would just straight run off right into the creek with sediment and particulates and pollutants. But this area has all the signs that I'm looking for. It's tons of pawpaws here, tons of spring beauties coming up, water leaf, and other spring ephemeral flowers, as well as the typical dominant trees that I would look for in an area like this, such as hackberry. You can see the corky bark of the hackberry. Also tons of buckeye trees and tons of box elder, which are all signs that point to ramps. But before we get into harvesting, let's find out what a ramp is. You may be able to see behind me that the forest floor is just exploding with pops of green. And these are all our wild leek and our native leek called ramps. This is what you typically see in a ramp patch. Ramps are alliums, meaning they have bulbs underneath the ground, and above ground they have reddish stems and usually 2 to 3 leaves depending on their maturity. So I went ahead and popped one out of the ground here so you can see it's in all its glory, and you can see we have the bulb attached to the roots here, and you can see that it has a rhizome right here into which all of these bulbs here are attached. And this is key, and I'll talk about this later. Now, you can see the 2 broad leaves here. And at the end of the day, the easiest way to identify this is by smell. It will always smell like funky onions. It'll never not have a smell. If you have something like that, you have lily of the valley. That plant, lily of the valley, is toxic, whereas ramps are not. Now here's something else to look for. These are the old seed heads from last year. Now this plays 2 functions for me. Number 1, it's an identifying function. I can actually see where the ramps went to seed last year, but also it indicates the maturity of the patch, because a lot of people like to say that ramp seeds take a long time to germinate, which is true. But when we can find mature patches, we know that seeds have been dispersed here year after year after year. And so there's a crop waiting right on the ground right here that we cannot see yet. Now on to harvesting. So you will come into places in the woods where there are an abundance, a seemingly endless amount of ramps, but that's not the case everywhere. And this is why we must be mindful, because I will only come to places that are rich and abundant to get my harvest. And I typically only harvest the leaves of the plant, and in a second I'm going to go over exactly how we're going to do that. But first I want to talk about what a ramp is. A ramp is an onion, okay? It's a clumping onion. And what people seem to maybe not understand is that sometimes by trimming back and releasing some of these patches, we can actually trigger that plant to grow more. And now that all comes down to when and where and how we do that. So typically what I'll do is find a patch like this that is pretty full, and I will come in and I will thin out the patch by grabbing from the middle and taking a leaf set, and maybe only doing that 2 or 3 times in a patch like this. And this is just going to allow more room for those other plants to grow, because these are not individual plants. They kind of are, but moreover, they are a clump. They are a clump of plants. And by taking some of these leaves, I'm triggering this plant to grow more and more abundant over time. Now, this is early in the season, but toward the end of the season, these ramps will do what all alliums do, which is they will bulb up. As the sun gets stronger in the sky, it's going to trigger that plant to grow a fat bulb for energy storage. So this is when I will come through and find the bulbs that are usually laying right on top of the surface, because as they bulb up, they come up. You can see that this ramp right here has a very thin bulb, because it hasn't developed yet. It's working on its leaves. So if we know when and where, we can actually harvest sustainable bulbs as well in small quantities. I usually only harvest about a mason jar full every year. Now, when we talk about over harvesting, a lot of people get scared and a lot of people don't know exactly what causes over harvest. So let's get into it. When we put a price on wild food like these ramps, we trigger a market. And maybe you started that market with good intentions on that you were going to harvest sustainably and ethically, but once that market is created, it almost cannot be stopped, because if you don't fill the order, someone else will. Someone with possible more nefarious intentions who don't care about the landscape. And that's when you see people coming out to the woods with shovels and buckets. Now, I never bring implements into the woods, maybe a hand trowel every now and again, but for the most part, if I can't get it with my bare hands, then I don't get it, because while disturbance in our ecosystems is good, and humans play a role in disturbance on the ecosystem, tearing up an entire ecosystem and removing all the plants is never good, ever. And so we must be mindful, we must be intentional. So I always tell people, if you're trying to feed your family and if you're trying to feed yourself, you're never going to overharvest. Where the overharvesting comes into play is when money comes into play. And so this is why I teach people that we don't need to be scared to harvest off the landscape. We just need to have common sense. We need to be mindful, and we need to have love and responsibility in our hearts, because if you come onto the land with intentions on getting food, then it's your responsibility to take care of those landscapes. And this is why we do this. Now, you could cut the leaves off with a knife, but I would advise against that, because that is a good way to spread disease. Because if your knife is not clean, or you don't clean it between each patch, there's a possibility that you could spread bacteria or fungus to other patches. So if you do want to use a knife, that's perfectly fine. I would suggest cleaning it, or maybe having an alcohol swab with you to kind of clean it before cuttings. If not, the pinch method, which I use, is very efficient, and you'd be surprised at how many you can harvest in a little bit of time with just a little bit of intention. I love ramps. Ramps are beautiful and amazing, and for me, they're more than just a food. It's the first sign of spring, and there is such a distinctive smell that comes from ramps that I look forward to it, and I dream about it during the wintertime. And I love coming down to southern Ohio in the spring to kind of extend my season, because we live in central Ohio, so ramps are just starting to poke their head out there, but you can see here, they're in full bloom. Yesterday I was in southern Ohio, and today I'm about 2 hours north. Before we jump in the kitchen to cook these ramps, I want to talk about how we can spread these ramps out over their native range again, because it's amazing that they exist in these small places. but it would be even better for them to regain control over their native ranges. So you can actually take these ramps in early spring and transplant them into your yard if you have the right space. So if you have a ecosystem maybe that stays wet or is sunny in spring but gets shaded out in the summertime and not a lot else will grow there, ramps are a great thing to add to your property. I added some last year and they have exploded, and this is how we conserve these environments, because while they exist in this abundantly in this small area, if something happened to this area, the ramps would no longer be here. So it's good to extend them out, because ramps used to cover the entire landscape of Ohio, and now they're reduced down in these tinier patches. And so by transplanting them, we can actually extend their range and keep them healthy and genetically diverse for our children and our children's children. So let me show you how I do it. We can already see that these ramps are much younger than the ramps I was harvesting yesterday. And I find this size right here is ideal for transplanting. So what I'll do is move some of the dirt out of the way. You can see there's a few more under there. And once we move this leaf litter out, we can kind of reach our finger down in there. And these ones are really close to the surface, it seems, so that's good. So I just kind of reach my finger down in there, get up underneath of it. I'm gonna get up underneath, kind of shovel some dirt out. And I'm using my hands because I don't want to disturb the patch any more than I need to. And you can see here's a little ramp right here. And I want to get the root system with it. So there we go. And there you have it. We have the ramp with the root that we're going to transplant into our yard, and we'll go back home and I'll show you how I transplant it. But before I do that, I'm going to grab what I grabbed and I'm going to put the leaves back. This is important. Nature loves ground covered. And if we disturb an area, we want to make sure that we replace the leaves that we removed so that it looks like we were never here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching. Join me next time in the kitchen in the Wild Food Lab, where I'm going to turn these ramps into seasoning salt and a compound butter.